Hi, I'm Cher, the Shadow Walker, and I'm taking a look at residential hauntings in British Columbia, Northwest Territories, Yellowknife, the Yukon, Alaska, Washington, Idaho, and Montana over the past 48 hours. And we're going to start with British Columbia. And at 11:45 on April 4th, at a private residence in Fernwood District, a local homeowner. While passing a hallway mirror, a witness reported seeing a tall man in a brimmed hat standing directly behind them. When they turned around, it was empty, and the air was static, and it felt that way for several minutes. And they reported it to the Victoria Ghost and Haunted Registry. And in a modern residential home at 3:15 on April 5th in the Lower Missions area, a mother checking on her infant child, and this is a poltergeist. The witness entered the nursery to find the temperature significantly colder than the rest of the house. She observed a heavy wooden rocking chair moving at a steady, deliberate pace, as if someone were sitting in it. No windows were open, and the movement stopped as soon as she turned on the main light. And she reported it to the BC skeptics and investigators. And in Westminster Cavern Street, this is basement pacing. Ongoing, most recent surge at 2 p.m. on April 5th. Live Work Heritage Building, Cavern Street. A local artist working in the basement studio. The artist reported the sound of heavy rhythmic footsteps pacing on the floorboards directly above him while he was in his shop below, and everything else was closed and empty. There was no people upstairs. This was followed by a black or gray figure seen sliding across the basement and the door, and it went right through the basement door and it vanished into the wall. So he reported it to the Ghosts of Vancouver local research archives. And in Pitt Meadows, this is called the Backyard Call at 5:30 p.m. on April 5th. Residential property backing onto Harrison Road. A teenager doing yard work heard a disembodied voice. The witness heard their father's voice clearly calling their name from the tree line. When they went inside the house to see what he wanted, they discovered that their father had been asleep on the couch for over an hour. The witness reported a heavy, unnatural silence in the yard immediately after the voice was heard, and he reported it to the Haunted History of BC. So in Washington State, over the last 48 hours, in Port Townsend, it's called Holy Smoke Hill. On April 5th at 10:30 p.m., a private residence in the Port Townsend, the Holy Hill House. That's what was formerly the Holy Hill House. The current homeowner and the neighbor. He put his name down, but I don't want to put that. Okay, so the entity they're saying is Robert Hill. That's who the residual spirit. Despite being strictly non-smoking house, the resident reported a thick, overwhelming smell of cigar smoke in the upstairs master bedroom. A neighbor across the street reported seeing a flickering orange light in the window, as if someone were lighting a match through the room, though the room was dark when the homeowner checked. And they reported it to the Port Townsend Historic Registry office. And in the early morning hours of April 6th, at approximately between 2 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. in the Bothell Everett Highway area, and it's a family of four, and this is a poltergeist class activity. The family reported rhythmic, heavy thumping coming from the inside walls of the living room. When their father used a thermal camera, he recorded a heat spike in the drywall that moved towards the ceiling and then vanished. This area has a long-standing history of intense poltergeist cases, most notably the Brothel Hell House nearby. And he reported it to the Washington State Paranormal Investigators. And at 11:15 on April the 4th, Rucker Avenue residential area in Everett, two pedestrians and a nearby resident. And the entity was Mrs. Rucker, residential a residual apparition. So they see this all the time in this residential area. While the historic mansion is a landmark, it sits within the dense residential area. The neighbors reported hearing a single high pitched piano note repeated for nearly 10 minutes. Two pedestrians reported seeing a female figure standing in an upright cupola window looking outward toward the water. The house was currently unoccupied at the time of the sighting, and they reported it to the Everett Historical Ghost Watch. And on the afternoon of April 5th, a private residence in the Montgomery House, well, near the Montgomery House. So it's a contractor performing repairs there. And this is an entity was a disembodied voice. The worker reported hearing a group of people whispering and arguing in the basement of the home. Believing the homeowners had returned, he went downstairs to find the area completely empty. He described the voices as sounding hollow, accompanied by the scent of wet earth. And he reported it to the Camella Community Paranormal Forum. And that's the one thing I find strange, this wet earth smell. I've never smelt that with ghosts, even seeing them or demons. I've never had any of those smells. I don't know if that's just me or if that's just the way it is. Over the last 48 hours in Idaho, North End Door Knocker is what it's called, and it's in Boise. At 3:10 a.m. on April 5th, a private historic homeowner North End neighborhood, local witness, and it's poltergeist residual energy. The resident was awoken by a series of 5 heavy, urgent knocks on their bedroom door. Upon opening it, the hallway was empty, but they witnessed the handle of the bathroom door directly across the hall slowly turning, fully on its own. The house was locked and the security system showed no external breaches, and they reported it to the Big River Paranormal. I had that in house turn of the century that we had, and it was previous owner, the husband, that had died, not in the house, but he had died, and until I cleared that house, he was there. He would open doors, he would bang the big oak doors in the living room. And the one night he came right through. I did a piece on it in earlier. If you're interested in it, go back and look on it. These things are normal. And at 11:45 on April 4th, and it's in a residential apartment that's converted. Okay, it was an old down historic building. So it's a university student, and they saw a shadow entity. While studying, the witness noticed a pitch black figure standing in the corner of their peripheral vision. When they looked directly at it, the figure did not vanish immediately. It glided behind the bookshelf. The witness reported an overwhelming sudden smell of stale tobacco and significant drop in the room's temperature, and they reported it to the Idaho State University local paranormal interest group. Very common when students are studying and they're under stress or anybody's under stress, you're opening yourself up for hauntings. Remember that. Try to center yourself, do some breathing exercises, and focus before you do anything and relax. In Idaho Falls, at 8:20 p.m. on April 5th, a private residence in this backs onto a downtown alleyway, and it's a family of 3, a residual apparition. While in their backyard, the family observed a man, early 20th century clothing, walking through a locked gate and vanished on the other side of their garage. This coincides with a surge of activity along Ghost Alley corridor reported by local historic researchers during the transition into April. And they reported it to the Idaho Falls Ghost Walk community trackers. And at 6 a.m. on April 6th, a resident near Lake Coeur d'Andrel, homeowner poltergeist. The homeowner witnessed the sound of dishes. Well, first they heard the sound of dishes crashing in the kitchen, and upon investigating it, there were no dishes broken, but every single cabinet and drawer had been opened to its fullest extent, and certain items were found sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, despite all the lower cabinets being locked. and they reported it to the North Idaho Paranormal Intake Group. So, moving along now to the Montana area, in the last 48 hours at 4:15 p.m. on April 5th, First Avenue North at a private heritage residence. The homeowner and a neighbor that was visiting, and they seen the entity of a residual spirit of a child. While in the kitchen, both reported hearing clear sounds of a child singing a nursery rhyme, coming from the spare bedroom upstairs. When they investigated, the room was empty and the singing ceased instantly. This matches the historical pattern of unseen children reported in nearby structures, and they reported it to the Great Falls Historic Heritage and Ghost Walk digital community log. That's a mouthful. And on April 6th at 1:30 a.m., a private residence on Old Street James Hospital site, a night shift worker returning home saw a shadowy figure. The witness reported a pale flickering light in their own second-story window from the street. Upon entering the house, they found the room pitch black, but felt a palpable aura of unease. They described a single candle sitting on the windowsill that had been moved from a different room, and they reported it to the Haunted Rooms of America. And at 10 p.m. on April 4th, in Dude Ranch Lodge vicinity, and this is an apartment, residential apartment. So it's a local tenant. They had the tenant reported a sudden drop in temperature, and they could smell tobacco in the room, and they reported it to the local paranormal society. That's about all they say about it. Now I'm taking a look at the Northwest Territories Yellowknife and the Yukon. At approximately 1:15 on April 5th, and that's AM, in the Old Town Yellowknife near Rock Ridge, a long-term resident and a visiting family member, they saw a shadow figure of a miner. The resident reported a tall, solid shadow standing in the doorway of the kitchen. When they turned on the light, the figure collapsed into the floorboards rather than vanishing. Moments later, the family member in the next room reported hearing the sounds of heavy work boots walking across the roof, despite there being no physical access. And it was reported to the local community paranormal forums and the Northwest Territories Spooky Legends digital log. And in Carcross, Yukon, residential school perimeter activity between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on April the 5th, and this is a historic school site. Multiple local residents experienced auditory phenomena, spectral and slash spectral light. Residents living near the former residential school site reported hearing unexplained crying and the sound of children's footsteps on the gravel roads when no one was outside. This follows a recent surge in reports being gathered for the territorial documentary series. One witness reported a cold blue light manifesting in the backyard that moved with intent towards the school boundary. It's so important and they are to the community elders. You need a spiritual person, shaman, a really high psychic like me, somebody like that, and they need to clear the grounds. These grounds need to be um, cleared, and they need to be cleared in a proper fashion. There's a very specific way to do this when it comes to this type of horror that has been um, inflicted upon children that have passed. And in White House in the Yukon, in the Tahini North, was a soldier sighting. I've had one of those myself. In the evening of April 4th, in a backyard in Tahini North near the old military house, a group of local teenagers, they saw a fully bodied apparition of a military-style man in fatigues. The witness reported seeing the man in an outdated military clothing walking calmly through a fenced backyard. When they called out to him, the figure turned, looked directly at them with a hollow expression, and faded away over the course of several seconds. There was no sign of forced entry or physical presence left behind, and they reported it to the Yukon News Ghost Stories. And in Dawson City on April the 6th at 3:30 a.m., so this is an apartment building, the McClary House, and the local resident is an artist, and they had poltergeist experience. The witness reported three sharp metallic knocks on their bedroom door. Upon investigating the hallway, they found significantly colder than the room. This was followed by the sound of heavy furniture being dragged in the unit above, which is currently vacant for the season. And they reported it to the Dawson City Heritage Ghost Walkers coordinators and to the local residents management. And last but not least, Alaska. In the last 48 hours in the Bootlegger Cove neighborhood, this is a homeowner, he saw a shadow person. The witness was awoken by the sound of heavy rhythmic footsteps in the hallway. Upon opening the door, they saw a solid black mass shaped like a tall man standing at the end of the hallway. The figure did not move or vanish immediately, but stayed visible for near 10 seconds before sinking into the floorboards, and they reported it to the Anchorage Paranormal Society. And in Fairbanks, at 6:15 p.m. on April the 5th, and this is West University area, family home. So a mother and her teenage son. This is a poltergeist. While preparing dinner, a heavy cast iron skillet was reportedly lifted off the stove and dropped onto the floor 3 feet away. This was immediately followed by the cabinet doors under the sink swinging open and shut. The witness reported all sharp electric smell, ozone, in the room during this activity, and they reported it to the Alaska Ghost Hunters digital log. And in Juneau, at 11:30 p.m. on April 4th, the historic residential house in Star Hill District, a resident and their guests, spectral apparition of a white lady. Both witnesses observed a translucent woman in Victorian era clothing standing in the corner of the living room. She appeared to be wringing her hands and looking towards the front door. When the guest spoke to her, the figure turned her head and faded into a gray mist and disappeared. And they reported it to the Juneau Heritage and Ghostwalk archives. And at 4 a.m. on April 5th, in the Eagle River area, this is a private residence, one person, shadow entity. The resident awoke to feeling suffocating pressure on their chest, common with specific entity encounters. They saw a dark, hooded figure standing in the corner of the room. When they reached for the bedside lamp, the figure glided behind the wardrobe and vanished. No physical evidence of entry was found, but the room temperature was 10 Celsius lower than the rest of the house, and they reported it to the North Night Paranormal Forum. That grounds needs to be cleared, really. And thank you so much for listening. And if you're having trouble, you can email me and I will help you for free. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and have an absolutely wonderful day.